My name is Ashleigh Hale, age 34. The house should have been a small theater of summer. Sunlight pooling on the hallway runner, socks kicked off in a scatter, the kind of accidental noise kids make when they come home from someone else's house with pockets full of stories. Instead, when I opened the front door and saw him, the sound of the day felt swallowed. He stood there like a photograph left in the rain, backpack pressed to his chest, eyes fixed at the floor. No run, no grin, no blur of motion from the sort of child who would announce himself by knocking over a lamp. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" I crouched to make my voice gentle, the way you do when you don't want to frighten a hurt animal. He looked up at me for a second, and whatever I saw in his eyes made my stomach tilt. Not just sadness, not just tiredness, something that dug its claws in. Fear. "Don't ever go back to that house," he whispered, like he'd practiced the sentence in dark places until his voice came out small and brittle. My mouth went dry. It took me a beat to shape the question. Why? What happened? He didn't answer. Instead, he fumbled in his backpack, pulled out the little phone I'd given him for emergencies, and handed it to me as if it were a guilty thing he needed me to hold. "Look at this," he said. I unlocked the screen with the languid impatience of a parent used to dropped phones and pizza order texts, and then my whole body folded inward. The video began with a shaky view. The angle was low, as if a device had been tucked into the gap between a sofa cushion or balanced against a shoe. The audio came first, the muffled clink of cutlery, a rise of light laughter, the slow, practiced cadence of people who'd been shaping judgments for years. At first, the voice seemed ordinary, the high, clipped laugh of someone used to being admired, but the words were poison. "He's soft," said one voice. "Just like his mother," mocked another. The tones were intimate, the kind of cruel closeness that lives in families. My heart hammered. The camera wobbled, and, for a second, the corner of a living room appeared. A rug I recognized from a dozen weekend visits, the floral pattern my boyfriend's mother favored, a lamp with a frayed shade. Then the frame stilled, and, in the margin of the shot, a small figure hunched in a corner, my son. He looked like he had shrunk 3 sizes. The woman, my boyfriend's mother, leaned in, voice syrupy and venomous at once. "You crying, boy? That's why your mother lets you be soft. Your father can't toughen you up." A second woman, a name I'd heard before but never expected to hear in this way, his ex, the kind of ex who lingered in group photos and holiday cards, laughed. "Maybe he needs something harder," she said, voice cold. Then the video did something worse than the words. It showed a hand yanking a pillow from the child's arms, a sudden slap that sounded muffled but real, even through the phone's tinny speakers. My palms went numb. He flinched, undoubtedly, but he didn't scream. He tucked himself tighter into himself, the way people do when they fold around what little safety they have left. When the footage cut, the apartment around me seemed too bright. I felt the blood thrumming in my ears, and the room tilting with a gravity that had nothing to do with the house. "How long?" I asked, and my voice was steadier than I felt. "My whole visit," he whispered. "Since last week. They said not to tell. They said you'd be mad at Mom." His words landed like shards. The mom he meant was me, his mother who trusted people to do right by him. My fists clenched until my nails pressed crescents into my palms. I wanted to make noise. I wanted to shout and fling doors open and make them all admit what they'd done. But something slow and icy took over, an angle of thought I recognized from cases I'd read late at night, the way method turns fury into a plan. That night I didn't sleep because there was no room for dreams anymore. There was only evidence. I replayed the video until the slur of their laughter embedded beneath my skin. Every time the image of my son curling into himself appeared, something inside me hardened and focused. I made a decision. A quiet, surgical choice. I would not let this be explained away as a misunderstanding. I would not be the woman who blamed circumstance or minimized harm because it was easier. If they thought cruelty could hide behind family dinners and polite smiles, they were wrong. They didn't know how to count the small things until they became a dossier. The next morning, I kissed him a long time at the school gate and whispered, "I've got you." He clung to me for a beat that felt like we were both keeping score. Then I walked into my car and drove to a law office, carrying the phone like contraband. The lawyer I found, calm, direct, someone who listened without flinch, watched the footage and didn't flinch. "This isn't just family tension," she said plainly. "That's evidence of emotional and physical harm." Good. That was what I wanted to hear. I didn't announce my plan at home. Instead, I did the quiet, brittle work of preparation. While I played the part of the exhausted, smiling partner, cooking dinner, doing dishes, letting my boyfriend think I'd been softened by the role of lover and mother, I was focused on the things they'd never look for. I booked a counselor for my son under the pretense of a checkup. I asked the counselor to make a private recording of the boy's account, to document dates and times. I sat with my son and asked him if he would tell the truth on camera. He did, with small, practical bravery that left me shaking when we held each other afterward. And when he left for school the next day, I installed cameras. Tiny, smart devices hidden in places we'd never think to check. A smoke detector in the living room, a slim plug-in behind a decorative console. I wired them to a feed that I could watch on my phone, and I practiced being ordinary so thoroughly that it would be impossible for them to sense anything was different. They assumed we were the sort of people who let insults roll off our backs. They assumed families cover for family. But in my line of work, digital forensics, reconstruction of deleted tapes, the neat tracing of evidence, assumption is the first mistake. At night, I lay awake, not because I was afraid of them, but because I wanted to be ready for the moment they were careless enough to betray themselves on camera. I wanted to give my son the one thing he had been denied, proof that his fear was not imagined and that what he had felt would not be shrugged away by a smile. Some people meet cruelty with immediate fury. I would meet it with a ledger of truth. I told myself that was justice. I told myself it was love. Outside, Summer went on pretending to be ordinary. Inside, I counted the hours until they would talk like they always did, loud enough, mean enough, thinking themselves shielded by comfort. I rehearsed the words I would say when the time came. I rehearsed for the sound I would make if I had to call the police myself. I promised my son, under dim hallway light, that nothing like that would happen again. He slept that night, with one small hand tucked into mine, and for the first time since the video, the tightness in my chest loosened just a little. The trap was set. The calm before the storm was colder than any shouting would have been. I was ready to wait for their vanity to undo them. I told myself I could ignore the tremor in my hands if I kept moving. Anger is a combustion engine. It needs direction, or it burns everything in the room. So I aimed it like a surgeon aims a scalpel. The first priority was simple and unromantic. Records, dates, voices, timelines, anything that would turn a whispered shame into undeniable fact. I started with the phone. I made copies, multiple encrypted backups placed in different cloud lockers and on a small flash drive tucked into the lining of my purse. Then I called the counselor I'd found the day after the video. Not because I wanted pity, but because professionals speak differently in the quiet rooms courts respect. The counselor, a woman named Dr. Alvarez, met my son with the soft steadiness of someone who'd seen too many small people find themselves folded into adult problems. She listened, documented, and agreed to write a report that would be clinical and blunt. In her office, my son told his story again, this time with the adult language that makes memory admissible. Dates, times, phrases they used, physical gestures. He described the closet, the pillow, the way his grandmother called him soft until the word became a bruise. When he left that afternoon, he walked lighter, not healed, far from it, but less trapped by the secret. I hugged him and whispered that he'd done brilliantly, and I meant it. Courage can look like small things: a phone pressed into a parent's hand, an admission on a couch across from a woman with a clipboard. Next, I went to the lawyer. Her name was Farah, sharp, efficient, and not at all surprised by the footage. She watched the video once, twice, then set her jaw like someone closing a file on a failing theory. "This is more than a family spat," she said. "This is emotional and physical child endangerment." She explained the mechanisms: how to preserve chain of custody for digital evidence, how to get emergency orders, how Child Protective Services would respond. She outlined the remedies: temporary custody, restraining orders, and didn't flinch when I said I wanted every available layer of protection for my son. While legal measures were set in motion, I began what felt like surveillance but was really just cataloging cruelty. I installed small cameras where a camera would be discreet and unremarkable, a smoke detector in the living room, a clock radio on the hallway shelf, a decorative outlet behind a plant. Each device fed to an encrypted stream that I watched from my phone as if it were a pulse. I watched their ordinary family life happen in dishonest, intimate detail. Cups set down, laughter at inside jokes, the way my boyfriend's mother smoothed her napkin like someone who used objects to smooth over conscience. They behaved with that terrible security people get when they believe the world is theirs. I did not tell him, my boyfriend, what I suspected. He had been complicit by omission at best, and at worst, he had hollowed out his own conscience to make room for his mother's voice. I played the role I needed to play in public, the smiling partner, bending over a pot, tucking a stray curl behind my ear. In the quiet, I was counting footage, logging dates, and asking myself how long I had trusted the wrong people without seeing the rot. There were nights I lay awake thinking of all the small betrayals stacked into the room where my son had curled up to avoid being struck. The moral calculus was messy. Did I confront them and risk them covering their tracks? Did I quietly call child services and claim panic? My background, digital forensics, tilted the answer. You don't act on fury. You assemble a case. You let the evidence speak louder than your shaking. So we gathered. There was the footage from the hidden video, the counselor's report, my son's recorded testimony, clear, brave, unadorned, and the logs of text messages between my boyfriend and his mother, where toughening up was joked about like a training regimen. I printed things. I time-stamped things. I organized them into a folder that might one day be the very defense that kept my child safe. During the days I set the cameras, I also set my face. We ate meals like a family in public. Laughter at the table, a toast here, a complaint about traffic there. My boyfriend spoke of errands and work and plans. He kissed me before bed with the sort of distracting tenderness that made it easier to forget suspicion for a moment. I remembered the man I'd once loved, the one who quoted poetry and picked me up at dawn with coffee when I'd worked late, and I mourned that memory while knowing mourning was not a plan. One afternoon, while he was out running an errand and his mother had come over for tea, the live feed pinged. On my phone, a conversation unspooled that had the same laugh, the same clipped tones, the same casual cruelty that had already made me sick. They used phrases with the flippancy of people rehearsing roles. He needs to be broken. A night in the box will fix him. And then they did what people do when they believe no one watches. They got careless. They staged cruelty as an instruction. They laughed at a child's pain like it was entertainment. I didn't storm in. I watched. I recorded. I let the feed collect their confidence. There were ethical knots. I'd been raised to believe family was sacrosanct, but when family starts to look like a permission to hurt, the word loses its halo. I had a son who flinched at pillows. I had an obligation to him that outstripped any blood loyalty. I thought of all the parents who flailed and cried when the court asked for evidence that could have been simple if only someone had thought to save it. I thought of my son's face on that first video, small, determined, and hurt, and I resolved that no one would speak for him unless I spoke loud enough. At night, I met with Farah again and walked her through the evidence. We rehearsed the language we would use for the police, for Child Protective Services, for the judge who would inevitably sit with a stack of facts and measure what those facts meant for a child's life. Farah scheduled emergency filings. She wrote letters that read like a scalpel, precise, unemotional, dangerous in their clarity. Then there was the small, human act that felt the most important. I asked my son if he wanted to make a statement on camera. He nodded, shy and solemn, and in his small voice he repeated what he had told Dr. Alvarez. He named dates. He explained that his grandma laughed at me and that when he cried, she put me in the closet. He talked about his mother, me, and the strange twist that made me ache. He sounded like he needed to protect me from blame as much as I needed to protect him from harm. When we stopped recording, he clung to me hard. "Will they believe me?" he asked. The innocence of that question cut through whatever legal theory I had assembled and left something bright and human exposed. "They will," I said. "I won't let anyone make you small again." To anyone watching from the outside, we were a family who'd had an argument, then smoothed the edges. To me, every laugh they shared on the feed was a confession. Every patronizing phrase was a fingerprint. Evidence was piling up like truth itself, and truth is the one weapon that doesn't rust. I could feel the trap tightening, not because I'd been vindictive, but because I'd been careful. People who hide behind kinship tend to forget they teach their cruelty aloud. They think rituals and manners shield them. I had learned that even the most ordinary day can betray its hidden cruelty if you're paying attention. And I was paying attention. When Farah said, "We can file today," my throat closed on something that might have been relief or dread. We filed. The system began its slow machinery: temporary emergency orders, child protective intake, an investigator assigned. The formalities clicked into place with an efficiency that made my pulse race. I went home that night and made dinner, not because I wanted to be nice, but because I wanted them to sink further into complacency. If they believed everything would be the same tomorrow, they would be less guarded. If they thought their normalcy was intact, they would speak freely, and when they did, the cameras would keep the proof. I did not like this version of myself, the patient predator waiting for the other shoe, but I liked the version who could give her son a future without bruises. I had chosen which self would define me: the woman who forgave blindly, or the woman who fought in a language the court would understand. I chose the latter. Night came with a hush, heavier than fear. I watched the live feed for hours, my phone a small, luminous altar. In the dark, I rehearsed the words I would say when the moment came to unmask them. I promised myself that whatever happened at the end of this, my son would be safe and our truth would be heard. And when my son slept, his breathing slow and no longer punctuated by nightmares, I allowed myself a small, fierce hope that evidence, like love, can save what it touches if you are brave enough to gather it. I pretended to leave for a work trip with the small, theatrical gestures that make lies feel real. A suitcase rolled out of sight, keys left on the hallway table, a goodbye kiss at the door that lasted just long enough to be believable. Then I drove to the airport, left my car in the long-term lot, and took a cab back to the house. The point wasn't drama, it was opportunity. If they believed I was gone, they would speak freely. Vanity is the greatest betrayer. I hid in the guest room with a sleeping bag and noise-canceling headphones, a small fortress where I could monitor the live feed without being noticed. My phone became my altar of attention. 2 tiny windows, one showing the living room, another the hallway. The feeds updated in the soft, merciless way of truth. Timestamps ticking, ordinary life unspooling, petty cruelties performed for applause. By dusk, the house filled, with the kind of ease only learned by people who assume they are protected by blood. My boyfriend's mother arrived first, swinging her bag like a nurse of manners. She was followed by the ex, cheekbones like a photograph and a smile that had once been charming enough to remove a charm. They settled into the kitchen with wine like it was liturgy. Their voices lifted, the kind of laughter that strips dignity from a person took root. "Where's the brat?" his mother barked when she came in, as if she were announcing herself to a play. "In his room," my boyfriend answered, voice oblivious, and my stomach turned. "He better not be starting up again," his mother said, as light as a weather comment. I watched them on the feed, hands animated, faces open, cruelty polished into small jokes. They talk the way people do when they believe no one is listening. "He's so soft," his mother said, the phrase like a ritual, just like his mother lets him be. The ex giggled and added, "Maybe he needs harder things. The box. A night without comforts." Their words were threaded with laughter so casual it felt rehearsed. Then the moment came, one of those small theater scenes that reveal character, an offhand directive that felt like the flip of a switch. His mother reached over and took a plush toy from the hallway bench where my son had left it. She waved it like a trophy. "Burn the teddy if he cries again," she said, and the ex laughed like it was a party trick. On the hallway feed, my son's bedroom door was a dark rectangle. The camera picked up the shadow as if it were a presence holding its breath. I did not step out then. I could have stormed the kitchen and ended things with a scream, but I had watched enough videos, learned enough procedural patience, to know that a spectacle can be dismissed as a domestic scene. I needed a record, not a scene. I waited until their arrogance became a confession. When they started describing what they'd already done, the closet works wonders. We taught him not to cry. I turned off my headphones, slid the sleeping bag into my arms like armor, and walked out of the guest room. The kitchen light painted the tiles a warm, ordinary yellow. They froze the way people do when the mirror is suddenly held up to them. The wine glass slipped from his mother's fingers and shattered across the floor. Time went grainy for a second, shards scattering, the ex's laugh strangled into silence, my boyfriend's face draining of color. I walked into that small hurricane with my phone in my hand, and on it, the live feed still showed the hallway time-stamped and unsparing. I heard everything, I said, and the words landed like a verdict. The room smelled of wine and floral perfume and the brittle, surprised air of people who had been caught mid-conspiracy. His mother scoffed, offended more by the presumption of threat than by the content. "You think a little tape will scare me?" she sneered. "We're family. We know how to raise tough kids. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I set my phone down and pulled a folder from the bag at my feet, one of the things I'd printed in the quiet hours between fury and action. Inside, the counselor's report, my son's recorded testimony, logged messages where toughening was joked about, and the hidden camera footage saved in multiple backups with timestamps and checksum verifications. The folder was small, but in it lived a case built the way I'd been trained to build them: incontrovertible, organized, patient. "You really don't know what I do for a living, do you?" I asked. And for the first time in days, I let a smile slip, cold and sharp. "I work in digital forensics." Their faces changed in real time. The ex-polite expression folded into something smaller. The mother's venom retreated to a corner where pride died slow. So what?" Her voice was brittle bravado. "So," I said, "I can recover deleted files, reconstruct footage, trace where messages came from, and I can prove what you think you hid." I placed the USB on the table like a gauntlet and let the silence grow. His mother's mouth opened and shut. She began to weave excuses as a net, but her words snagged on evidence. "We didn't mean," she started, and the ex tried to compose an expression of detached sympathy, as if they were discussing a dog's bad behavior. I hit play on the audio from the kitchen camera. Their conversation, so casual, so cruel, filled the room again. But this time it was not private. My boyfriend's face went ashy. He found his voice, but it was thin. I didn't know she'd do that," he stammered, hands finding the back of a chair as if it could anchor him. "I was at work." "You didn't hear your son telling you to stop?" I asked. "You were working," he said, and the phrase was a brittle shield. "You were the one who told me not to rock the boat," he added, pleading for a pass that would absolve him. But the recordings were patient. They did not care for pleas. His mother doubled down, anger masking fear. "Take it to court," she said. "You work while I raise the boy. She's the mother. You'll lose." Her confidence was a last-ditch weapon. She believed kinship would be a cloak. She believed courts favored bloodlines. I let her believe it for a beat longer, then slid the USB into my phone and placed a printed copy of all the backups on the table. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Take it to court." I told them what the camera had seen, what the counselor had written, and how the timestamps correlated with the messages where they joked about the closet and the box. I described the evidence chain, how the files were duplicated, how the hash values proved no alteration, and I watched as the air in the room curdled. Then I called the police. My voice was calm on the line. "I'm reporting child endangerment. I have recorded evidence. I can provide everything." I read them the address. I said the word minor and felt the small, enormous relief that comes with being heard in a system designed to respond. The dispatcher was methodical. Officers en route, Child Protective Services to follow. I told the person on the line I had evidence and would hand it over. Panic unfurled in the kitchen like a dark wave. His mother's face showed the very real calculus of someone who'd misjudged the reach of law and the stubbornness of a mother defending her child. The ex stammered. My boyfriend tried to reach for me. His hand hovered, as if he might plead forgiveness, and then realize what he asked for had no bearing on what had happened. The officers arrived quickly. I met them at the door and handed over the USB, printed reports, and the counselor's contact. The lead officer listened with a gravity that made the room feel smaller. He played back the audio and watched the hallway footage with the slow, clinical attention of someone whose job is to make judgment from facts. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a translation of my folder into action. They took his mother for questioning that night. She protested, tried to play the victim with tears, and a practiced voice that had served her well at luncheons and book clubs. But when I handed them the counselor's notes and my son's testimony, the police took a different kind of measure. "We will be filing a report," the lead officer said. "Child Protective Services will open an investigation. We will also be getting statements." My boyfriend's reaction was a complicated mix: shame, anger, disbelief, grief. He had 1,000 tiny reasons for why it had gone on: trust, family loyalty, a blind spot. None of them were legal defenses. He promised he hadn't known. He said he would cooperate. We both knew cooperation could mean many things. When the deputies left with his mother, the house was hollow in a way that felt like an emptied stomach. The dinner plates were still on the table, the scent of the meal lingering like a ghost of normalcy. For the first time since the video, I felt the center of our life shift underfoot. That night, my son slept between us with an innocence that had been bought in sharp currency. He woke and crawled into my arms, and we held each other with the two people who had survived the moment. Outside, the neighborhood whispered its late-night business. Inside, evidence had done what the heart could not alone. It had created a bulwark. There was no victory in that quiet. There was only progress. The trap had worked not because I wanted revenge, but because I would not let cruelty be shielded by affection. When someone you love is hurt by the people you trust, you learn a new grammar of rage, one that speaks in evidence, procedure, and protection. We had crossed an invisible line. They had been exposed. The next days would be procedural: police interviews, CPS intake, emergency filings. But for the first time since the phone had been handed to me, I allowed myself to inhale. My son whispered in the dark, "Are they gone?" I kissed his hair and said, "They're gone for now. We're safe." His small body relaxed against mine like a boat finally allowed to drift away from a jagged shore. I did not know what the court would decide in the end. I only knew what I had done with the fury that rose in me. I had used it to build a sanctuary. The confrontation had broken the living room into before and after. We had forced the private cruelty into public light, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt like a place where safety might be possible again. The courthouse smelled of paper and cold air, that strange mixture of bureaucracy and judgment. I sat at the long oak table, a folder clutched so tightly in my lap, it might as well have been an extension of my ribs. Inside it lived everything: my son's video testimony, the counselor's clinical notes, the hidden camera footage, and the call logs. Every page was a fragment of pain turned into proof. To my left was Farah, calm as always, the kind of lawyer who breathed in details and exhaled strategies. To my right, empty space, because the seat my boyfriend should have filled was now across from me. He sat beside his mother, who still carried herself with a smug tilt, as though cruelty could be disguised as tradition. Next to her sat the ex, quiet, rehearsed in sympathy, but wearing eyes that had mocked my son. Across the aisle, my boy sat with a child advocate, his little legs swinging under the chair, his fingers knotted in his lap. He avoided everyone's gaze until his eyes found mine. Then he gave the smallest smile, a silent flag of courage. That was enough to steady me. The judge was a woman with steel gray hair pulled back like a blade. She wasted no time on pleasantries. "Let's see the evidence, she said. Farah stood, placed the USB on the desk, and the first video played. The shaky angle of the living room, the women laughing, the words dripping like acid. He's soft, just like his mother lets him be. The audio echoed in the sterile chamber. My son's small form was visible in the corner, shrinking into himself. You could feel the air change, a collective intake, as the court absorbed what cruelty looks like when it believes it's private. Then the counselor's report. Dr. Alvarez's words were clinical, but they burned hotter than flames. The child reports repeated emotional denigration. Witness accounts align with physical intimidation. Symptoms include withdrawal, hypervigilance, and fear responses consistent with trauma. His mother's face drained. The ex shifted in her chair, eyes darting. My boyfriend looked 10 years older in 5 minutes, his hands white-knuckled, his lips moving as though silently rehearsing excuses. The final blow was my son's recorded testimony. His voice was small but clear. "Grandma says I'm weak. She said if I cry again, she'll put me in the box." Mommy laughed. She didn't help me. The silence afterward was brutal. You could have heard the tick of the courtroom clock. The judge spoke slowly, carefully, as though chiseling each word into stone. I have presided over many cases of neglect and abuse. Rarely do I see such calculated disregard from both a parent and extended family. She turned her gaze toward the grandmother. You are hereby barred from any contact with the minor, effective immediately. His mother's smugness crumbled, replaced by a tremor she couldn't disguise. The judge's eyes shifted to my boyfriend. As for you, you enabled it. You allowed it to continue. For now, your visitation will be supervised only, pending full psychological evaluation and parenting review. He opened his mouth, but the gavel of her voice silenced him. Then she turned to me. Ms. Hale, you are granted full physical and legal custody of your son. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. My son glanced up at the child advocate, who whispered the news to him. He bolted from his seat and into my arms before protocol could object. He pressed his face into my shoulder and whispered, I'm safe now. Forever, I promised, and I meant it. In the weeks that followed, papers were signed, orders filed, and the house felt empty, but finally safe. My boyfriend tried, letters, late-night calls, an email dripping with apologies. I didn't know. I was manipulated. Please don't let our family die. My reply was one sentence. You stood and watched while your mother broke our son's spirit. There's no coming back from that. He asked for visitation, but my son refused. The court didn't force him. His presence dwindled to letters. 2 came. My son never answered. His mother tried to sue me for defamation, but the case was dismissed in less than 10 minutes. Farah chuckled as we left the courthouse. She destroyed her own credibility. We moved to a new town, small enough that every streetlight felt like a guard tower against the past. My son began therapy. Slowly, his shoulders straightened. His laughter returned like a language relearned. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked softly, Mom, why didn't you leave earlier? I held him close and said, because I thought staying was protecting you. But now I know real protection means walking away when people won't change. He nodded, and in his nod was forgiveness I hadn't earned but needed. A year passed. He was thriving. Captain of the junior robotics team, top of his class, voted kindest student by his peers. Every night we read mystery novels together, his head growing heavy against my arm until sleep came without nightmares. I thought the past was buried until one rainy Thursday the phone rang. It was him, my ex. His voice was thinner, raw. I'm in a shelter. I left my mother. I've been in therapy. I'm trying to fix what I destroyed. Please, just once, let me see him, to say I'm sorry. I looked at my son, cross-legged on the couch, laughing at a cartoon. He was whole, safe, healing. You're not ready, I said, and he's not ready to see the man who stood by and did nothing. There was silence, then quiet sobs. I understand. I just hope one day he won't hate me. I didn't answer, because that wasn't mine to decide. Later that night, my son asked, who called? I kissed his forehead. Someone from the past, but we don't have to go back there. He nodded, snuggled closer, and in that small act I knew the past was sealed and the future belonged to us. Was this justice, or should the storm have burned hotter, longer? That verdict, I leave to you. The seasons shifted with the quiet insistence of time, and our new life rooted itself like a tree that had finally found good soil. My son woke each morning without dread, his steps lighter as though the floor beneath him no longer threatened to collapse. Therapy peeled back the scars slowly, but each week I saw more of him return, the mischievous spark in his eyes, the eagerness in his voice when he spoke about building robots or acing a math test. For me, the silence of the house became a gift rather than a warning. No cruel laughter over wine glasses, no whispered comparisons meant to cut. Just us, 2 survivors rebuilding with patience. At night, when he fell asleep, I often sat by the window, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing and realizing I wasn't waiting for another betrayal to shatter the walls. And yet, shadows have a way of reaching even into new light. It came in the form of a letter, hand-delivered, no return address, but with handwriting I recognized at once, my ex's. I didn't open it immediately. It sat on the counter for 2 days, its presence like a thorn I couldn't ignore. When I finally tore it open, the words inside were fragile and desperate. I've been clean for months. I've cut ties with her. I want to know if there's a chance, not for us, but for him. Just to show him I'm not the same man who failed him. Please, let me try. My hands shook. not with longing, but with the ache of complicated truth. Could people change? Could someone who had stood silent in the face of cruelty earn back even a sliver of trust? I didn't know. And more importantly, it wasn't my forgiveness to grant. It was my son's. That night, as I tucked him in, I debated whether to tell him. His smile was easy, his questions about tomorrow's science fair full of excitement. How could I burden him with the past when he was finally living in the present? I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You're safe. Always." I burned the letter the next day, not out of spite, but out of protection. Some doors aren't meant to be reopened, not until the one who was hurt chooses to knock. Months later, the phone rang again. This time it was late, past midnight. My heart jumped, fear instinctively tightening my chest. It was him. His voice trembled on the other end. "I just wanted to hear if he's okay. Just once. I won't ask to speak to him. Just tell me he's happy." I closed my eyes, listening to the silence of our safe home, the hum of the refrigerator, the steady tick of the clock. My son was asleep, his face soft, his future intact. "He's happy," I said simply. And before he could answer, I hung up. Life went on. My son thrived, laughter blooming like it had been waiting all along. And I learned that sometimes justice isn't a firestorm that burns everything down. It's the quiet, persistent choice to protect every single day. The past had claws, but it no longer had teeth. And the bond between mother and son, the bond they tried to fracture, was unbreakable. Justice had been served. Safety had been reclaimed. And our story was no longer about betrayal. It was about survival, love, and the courage to walk away when staying would have meant ruin.